The letter. The letter arrived on the morning my mother died. I found it in the mailbox of our Toronto apartment while the paramedics were still loading her body into the ambulance. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the envelope. It was addressed to Miss Catherine Whitmore in elegant, old-fashioned handwriting. Inside was a single page of cream-colored paper. Dear Miss Whitmore, I am writing on behalf of the estate of Agnes Blackwood, your maternal grandmother, who passed away 3 months ago at her home in Ravens Hollow, Massachusetts. You are named as the sole beneficiary of her estate, which includes the Blackwood Manor and all its contents. The property has been in your family for over 300 years. Your mother explicitly refused her inheritance. However, the terms of the family trust specify that if she declines, the estate passes to the next female heir, you. I understand this comes at a difficult time. Please accept my condolences for your mother's passing, which I learned of this morning through channels I will explain when we meet. You must claim the inheritance in person within 30 days of your mother's death, or the estate will be permanently dissolved and the property destroyed as specified in Agnes Blackwood's will. I await your arrival in Ravens Hollow. Yours in sympathy, Elias Crane, executor of the Blackwood estate. I read it 3 times, my mother's words from her deathbed echoing in my memory. Never go to Ravens Hollow. Never claim that inheritance. Promise me, Catherine, promise me. I had promised, but my mother had also left me with $87,000 in medical debt, a worthless English literature degree, and no other family in the world. I was 26 years old, broke, alone, and desperate. So I broke my promise. 2 weeks later, I drove to Ravens Hollow to claim my inheritance. I should have listened to my mother. Part 1: Arrival. Ravens Hollow wasn't on most maps. I had to use my phone's GPS to find it, and even then, the signal cut out twice before I reached the town limits. The last 30 miles were on a narrow road that wound through dense Massachusetts forest, the kind of old-growth woods that seemed to swallow sunlight. The town itself looked like it had been frozen in time around 1950. Main Street had maybe 20 buildings, a general store, a diner, a post office, a church with a tall white steeple. Everything was immaculately maintained but eerily empty. I saw 3 people during my drive through town, and all 3 stopped what they were doing to watch my car pass. Their stares weren't curious, they were pitying. The directions Elias Crane had sent led me to the edge of town, where Main Street became a dirt road that climbed into heavily forested hills. 5 miles up that road, I found the gates. Blackwood Manor's entrance was marked by iron gates at least 12 feet tall, covered in intricate metalwork that formed patterns of ravens, bare trees, and symbols I didn't recognize. The gates stood open, but they looked like they could close and seal out the world. Beyond the gates, a gravel driveway disappeared into the woods. I drove through, feeling like I was passing some invisible threshold. The temperature dropped noticeably. My skin prickled with goosebumps despite the June warmth. The driveway wound upward for another mile before the house revealed itself. Blackwood Manor was massive, a 3-story Victorian Gothic structure of dark stone and weathered wood, with a tower rising from one corner and gables jutting at odd angles. Dozens of windows stared down at me like empty eyes. The house was surrounded by overgrown gardens and flanked by ancient oak trees that seemed to lean toward the building, as if the forest itself was trying to reclaim it. It was the most beautiful and most unsettling house I'd ever seen. A man stood on the front steps waiting. He was elderly, probably in his 70s, dressed in an old-fashioned black suit. His white hair was neatly combed, and his posture was military straight. I parked and got out. The silence was immediate and oppressive. No birds, no wind, nothing but the sound of my footsteps on gravel. "Miss Whitmore," the man said, descending the steps to meet me. I'm Elias Crane, thank you for coming. His handshake was firm and cold. His eyes were a pale gray, almost colorless, and they studied me with unsettling intensity. Thank you for handling the arrangements, I said awkwardly. Your letter mentioned you knew about my mother's death the same day it happened. The house knows, Elias said simply, as if that explained everything. When a Blackwood woman dies, the house knows. It has for 3 centuries. I wanted to ask what that meant, but Elias was already walking toward the manor. Come, I'll show you the property. Then we have important matters to discuss. The interior of Blackwood Manor was even more impressive than the exterior. The entrance hall had a vaulted ceiling, a grand staircase, and dark wood paneling carved with the same raven motifs from the gates. Portraits lined the walls, stern-faced women in period clothing, all with dark hair and pale skin like mine. Your ancestors, Elias explained, noticing my gaze. Every Blackwood woman for 13 generations. You're the 14th. My mother never mentioned any of this. I didn't even know she had family in Massachusetts. Your mother spent her entire adult life trying to forget this place. Elias led me through a dining room that could seat 20, a library filled with thousands of books, a drawing room with furniture that belonged in a museum. Every room was perfectly preserved, as if waiting for inhabitants who never came. Agnes lived here alone, I asked. For the last 60 years, yes. She refused to leave. Someone from the Blackwood line must always remain in the house. Why? Elias stopped at a heavy oak door at the end of a hallway. Because of what happened in 1692, because of what the Blackwoods did and what they bound here to pay for it. He opened the door to reveal a stone staircase leading down into darkness. The answers you want are in the cellar, Elias said. But first you must understand the history. Come to my office tomorrow morning. I have a cottage on the property. Tonight you should rest. Get acquainted with the house. It will get acquainted with you. What does that mean? The house is aware, Miss Whitmore. It knows when a Blackwood is present. You'll understand soon enough. He handed me a large iron key ring. These open every room. I've had the electricity and plumbing updated so the house is livable. There's food in the kitchen. Your grandmother's bedroom is on the 2nd floor, 3rd door on the right. I've prepared it for you. You're not staying. I've never spent a night in Blackwood Manor, Miss Whitmore. No one has except Blackwood women. No one else can. He moved toward the front door. Lock the doors tonight, all of them. And if you hear things, voices, footsteps, crying, don't investigate. Stay in your room until morning. Wait, what? What kind of things? But Elias was already walking to his car, a vintage sedan parked beyond the circular driveway. Tomorrow morning, he called back. 9 o'clock, we'll discuss everything. He drove away, leaving me alone with my inheritance. I spent the next hour exploring the house in the fading daylight. Blackwood Manor had 37 rooms across 3 floors in the tower. Most were bedrooms, all furnished but empty of personal effects. Every room had the same unsettling quality, perfectly preserved but lifeless, like a museum of someone else's life. The library was the most impressive room. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of volumes, many of them ancient. I noticed entire sections devoted to subjects that made me uneasy: witchcraft, demonology, binding rituals, New England colonial history. One book lay open on a reading table as if someone had just been studying it. The title was Practices of Colonial Witchcraft, The Salem Connection. A passage was underlined in faded ink. The accused witches of Salem were not the only practitioners in Massachusetts. Many escaped trial by fleeing to isolated communities. Others used their arts to avoid detection entirely. Some families carried the practice for generations, hiding their knowledge behind respectable facades. I closed the book quickly, suddenly uncomfortable. The tower room was locked, and none of my keys fit. Through the keyhole I could see only darkness. I found the bedroom Elias had mentioned, a large chamber with a four-poster bed, antique furniture, and a window overlooking the tangled gardens. Someone had laid out fresh linens and left a vase of black roses on the dresser. The flowers looked freshly cut, but who had put them there? The sun was setting. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, so I went to the kitchen. The kitchen was modern compared to the rest of the house, updated appliances, though still decades old. The refrigerator contained basics: eggs, milk, bread, cheese, vegetables. The pantry was fully stocked. As I made a simple meal, I became aware of the silence. It was absolute. No hum of electricity, no distant traffic, no ambient sound at all. Just silence so complete it felt oppressive, like the house was holding its breath. I ate quickly at the kitchen table, watching darkness fall through the window. The forest beyond the house became a wall of shadows. At exactly 8:47 p.m. I noted the time. The house made its first sound. A creak from somewhere above. Footsteps on the second floor, slow and deliberate, walking down the hallway above the kitchen. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. The footsteps continued, a measured pace, heel toe, and stopped directly above my head. Silence. Then three distinct knocks, as if someone was rapping knuckles against the floor. "Hello," I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. No response. I grabbed a knife from the counter. Ridiculous, what would I do with it? And crept upstairs. The second-floor hallway was empty. All the doors were closed just as I'd left them. I checked each room. Nothing, no one. But when I returned to the hallway, I noticed something: wet footprints on the floor. Not water, something dark and thick, leading from one of the bedrooms to the stairs. I followed them down to the first floor. They led to that oak door, the one Elias had said led to the cellar. The door was open. I knew I'd seen Elias close it, I was certain. The footprints disappeared down the stone steps into darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to close the door, lock it, and go back to the bedroom. Instead, because I'm apparently an idiot, I found a flashlight and descended into the cellar. The stone steps were steep and narrow. The walls were damp, covered in something that might have been moss or mold. The air smelled of earth and decay and something else, something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in a grave. At the bottom, the flashlight revealed a large basement with a low ceiling supported by stone pillars. The space was filled with old furniture, trunks and boxes, generations of storage. But that's not what made me stop breathing. In the center of the cellar was a circle carved into the stone floor. Inside the circle were symbols I didn't recognize, occult markings, words in Latin or something older. And at the very center of the circle sat a wooden chair facing the stairs. Someone was sitting in the chair. A woman. She wore a long black dress from another century. Her hair hung in dark tangles around her face. Her skin was pale, too pale, with a gray tinge like old parchment. And she was staring directly at me. "You came," she whispered. Her voice was dry, rustling like dead leaves. "After all these years, another daughter has come." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare as the woman slowly stood from the chair. She stepped forward, and I realized she wasn't walking on the floor. She was floating, her feet inches above the stone, moving toward the edge of the carved circle. When she reached the circle's boundary, she stopped, smiled. It was a terrible smile, full of hunger and rage. "Welcome home, Catherine Whitmore. Welcome to your inheritance." She reached toward me. I ran. Up the stone steps, through the hallway, up the grand staircase, into the bedroom. I slammed the door and locked it, then pushed the dresser against it for good measure. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pull out my phone. No signal. Of course there was no signal. I sat on the bed, every light in the room blazing, and waited for dawn. The night was very, very long. Part 2: The History. I must have fallen asleep just before sunrise, because I woke to bright morning light streaming through the windows and someone knocking on the bedroom door. "Miss Whitmore, it's Elias Crane, it's past 9 o'clock. We had an appointment." I moved the dresser and opened the door. Elias stood in the hallway, looking exactly as he had yesterday, neat, composed, unruffled. "You saw something last night," he said. "It wasn't a question." "There's a woman in the cellar, in a circle. She spoke to me." "Yes, that would be Mercy Blackwood, your ancestor, the first." Elias walked past me into the room, setting a leather portfolio on the bed. "I apologize for not warning you more explicitly, but you needed to see for yourself, to understand that this inheritance is not just property." "Who is she? What is she? Is she a ghost?" "In a manner of speaking, Mercy Blackwood is trapped, bound to this place by her own magic, by the crimes of her daughters, and by the covenant that keeps this family cursed." Elias opened the portfolio and removed a sheaf of yellow documents. "Sit. This will take some time to explain." I sat. Elias remained standing, holding the documents like a professor lecturing. In 1692, during the Salem witch trials, 3 sisters from Salem village fled to avoid accusation. Their names were Mercy, Constance, and Deliverance Blackwood. They were actual witches, practitioners of old craft passed down through their mother's line. He handed me a document. It was a family tree, handwritten, showing the Blackwood lineage from 1692 to present day. "The sisters came here to this hollow in the wilderness and built a home. They practiced their craft openly, believing they were safe from the hysteria consuming Salem. They were powerful. They could bind spirits, curse enemies, heal or harm with equal ease." Elias' expression darkened. "But power corrupts. The sisters grew ambitious. They wanted more knowledge, more power, immortality itself, so they attempted something forbidden. They tried to summon and bind a demon." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but after what I'd seen last night, I couldn't. "The ritual required sacrifices," Elias continued. 7 lives offered willingly. The sisters found 7 people from surrounding villages, desperate people, dying people, and promised them salvation in exchange for their souls. On the night of the winter solstice in 1693, they performed the ritual in this house's cellar. He handed me another document, a copy of something old, written in archaic English. I could barely read it, but certain words stood out: sacrifice, binding, eternal servitude. "The ritual failed," Elias said, "or succeeded in the worst possible way. They bound something, but not what they intended. Not a demon, something older, something that exists in the spaces between life and death, something that feeds on suffering and souls." "What happened to the sisters?" Mercy realized what they'd done. The thing they'd bound was growing stronger, feeding on the 7 sacrifices. Soon it would break free and consume not just them, but everyone for miles. So Mercy did the only thing she could. She used herself as a permanent anchor. She bound herself in the circle you saw, tied her own life force to the entity, creating a prison that would last as long as her bloodline endured. My blood went cold. As long as her bloodline endured. Yes, that's the curse. The Blackwood women are born bound to this place, to the house, to the entity trapped below. Every generation, at least one daughter must remain here, maintaining the binding. If the female line ends, if no Blackwood woman lives in this house, the binding breaks, and what's trapped in that cellar will be free. I stood up, backing away. No, this is insane. You're saying I'm trapped here, that I can't leave." "You can leave," Elias said calmly. "Many Blackwood women have left. Your mother left. But someone must remain. If you leave, if you refuse the inheritance, the house and everything in it will be destroyed, including the binding circle. The entity will be released." "Then let someone else do it. I didn't ask for this." "There is no one else. You're the last. Your mother had no other children. Her cousins are all male. The curse only passes through the female line. You are the 14th and final generation of Blackwood women. If you walk away, you end the line. I sank back onto the bed, my mind racing. What happens if it's released, really? Elias was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. In 1878, there was a gap in the succession. The Blackwood woman of that generation died suddenly, and her daughter was still an infant. For 3 days, no adult Blackwood woman lived in this house. The binding weakened. The entity began to push through. He pulled a newspaper clipping from his portfolio. The headline read, "Mysterious Plague Strikes Ravens Hollow, 23 dead in 3 days." People within 5 miles of this house began dying. Their bodies were found drained, withered, as if their life force had been sucked out. The infant's aunt, your great-great-great-grandmother, rushed here from Boston and restored the binding. The death stopped immediately. I stared at the clipping. The article described bodies aged decades overnight, victims screaming about shadows in their homes, and a palpable atmosphere of dread that hung over the town. So you're telling me that if I leave, if I refuse this inheritance, I'm responsible for unleashing something that will kill everyone in this area? Yes. That's not a choice, that's a prison. I know every Blackwood woman has said the same thing. Elia's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, Catherine. Your mother tried to escape this. She left as soon as she turned 18, changed her name, never looked back. She thought if she never told you about the Blackwoods, if she kept you completely separate, somehow you'd be spared. But the inheritance doesn't care about wishes. It follows the blood. I put my face in my hands. 2 weeks ago, I'd been planning my mother's funeral and worrying about debt. Now I was being told I had to spend my life in a haunted mansion, maintaining a magical prison for a soul-eating entity. What about Mercy? I asked. The woman I saw last night, if she's bound in the circle, why is she still aware, still there? Because the binding required her conscious will. She can't rest, can't die, can't move on. She exists in a state between life and death, forever maintaining the spell. After 300 years, Elias paused. She's not entirely sane anymore. Sometimes she's lucid. Sometimes she's vengeful. Sometimes she forgets who she is entirely. Can I talk to her? You can, but I advise caution. Mercy has knowledge. She knows the history, the magic, the nature of what's bound below. But she's also bitter, manipulative, and she hates every Blackwood woman who came after her. She sees you all as beneficiaries of her sacrifice. I stood up again, packing. I need to see the full property. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. And I need to see what's actually in that cellar, not just Mercy, the thing she's binding. Elia's face went pale. I strongly advise against. I'm not staying here, maintaining some magical prison without understanding what I'm guarding. Show me everything. After a long moment, Elias nodded. Very well, but we go during daylight, and we don't get close to the inner circle. We spent the morning exploring the grounds. The Blackwood property covered almost 200 acres of forest, gardens, and overgrown fields. Elias showed me the boundaries, marked with iron posts driven into the ground, each carved with protective symbols. These were placed by Constance and Deliverance after Mercy bound herself, Elias explained. They strengthened the prison, ensured the entity couldn't extend its influence beyond the property. Where are Constance and Deliverance now? Dead, they lived only a few years after the binding. The guilt destroyed them. But they had daughters first. Your line comes from Mercy's daughter, who was born before the ritual. We walked through the gardens, once elaborate, now wild and overgrown. At the far edge, I found a family cemetery. Dozens of headstones, all women with the Blackwood name. The most recent was Agnes Blackwood, my grandmother, 1930-12024. She held the line. Agnes was here for 60 years, Elias said. She took the inheritance at 20, lived alone in this house, never married, never left except for brief trips to town. She was formidable, strong. She made peace with her duty. I looked at the other graves. So many women, so many lives given to this prison. Did any of them try to break the curse? Many tried, all failed. The magic mercy used is ancient and absolute. It can't be undone without releasing what it binds. As we walked back toward the house, I noticed something. There are no birds. No animals come near the property. They sense what's here. That evening, after Elias left, I steeled myself and descended to the cellar again. Mercy was in her chair exactly as before, but this time she was expecting me. "Catherine," she said, her voice that dry whisper, "you've learned the truth." "Some of it." I stayed at the bottom of the stairs, keeping distance between us. "I want to hear your version. Why did you do the ritual? What were you trying to summon?" Mercy's laugh was bitter. "Immortality, power. Everything every fool wants when they're young and certain they deserve more than God granted them." She stood, moving toward the circle's edge. "We were witches, Catherine, real witches. We could speak to spirits, bend nature, curse our enemies, but we wanted more. We wanted to live forever." "What went wrong?" "Everything. The ritual required 7 willing sacrifices, 7 souls to feed the entity we were calling. We found 7 people and promised them paradise, lied to them. And when we performed the ritual, we learned the truth. What we were summoning wasn't a demon. It was something that exists in the space between worlds, something that feeds on life itself." She pressed her hands against the invisible barrier of the circle, her face inches from the boundary. "It came through, started consuming the sacrifices, then turned on us. I realized if I didn't stop it, it would devour everything, my sisters, the town, perhaps the entire colony." "So you bound yourself." "I used the sacrifices' deaths to power a counterspell, tied my life force to the entity, creating a prison it couldn't escape, and I've been here ever since. 331 years, Catherine. Do you have any idea what that's like? To exist but not live, to be aware but not free, to watch generations of my descendants live and die while I remain frozen in this moment." Her eyes, and I realized for the first time they had no pupils, just gray emptiness, fixed on me with terrible intensity. "I am so tired, so very tired, and you, Catherine, are my last hope." "Last hope for what?" Mercy smiled that horrible smile. "For release, for ending this. The bloodline is dying, you're the last. If you refuse the inheritance, if you let the line end, the binding breaks, the entity is released, and I finally get to die." My stomach turned. "You want me to unleash that thing, let it kill people?" "I want freedom, after 3 centuries of imprisonment. Is that so wrong?" Her voice rose, echoing in the cellar. "Besides, perhaps the entity won't be so terrible. Perhaps it will consume a few dozen souls and then dissipate. Perhaps the fear is exaggerated." "You don't believe that?" "No," Mercy admitted. "It will be catastrophic. It will spread from this place like plague, consuming everything in its path until there's nothing left to feed on. Hundreds will die, maybe thousands." She leaned closer to the barrier, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But I don't care anymore. I've earned my rest. I've paid my price 300 times over. Let the world burn if it means I can finally sleep." I backed away from her. "I won't do it. I won't be responsible for that." "Then you'll stay here, live in this house, maintain the binding, alone, childless, until you die bitter and insane like Agnes did, like they all do." "I'll find another way." "There is no other way," Mercy's shriek echoed through the cellar. "Do you think you're the first to try? Deliverance tried for years. Every Blackwood daughter has searched. There is no breaking this curse without releasing what it binds." I ran back up the stairs, her laughter following me. Part 3. The Haunting INTNSFIS. That night the house showed its true nature. It started with whispers. I was in the library, researching the Blackwood family history in the old journals, when I heard voices coming from the walls. Not words I could understand, just susurrus of conversation, like a party in another room. I followed the sound to the drawing room. Empty, but the whispers continued coming from the walls, the ceiling, everywhere and nowhere. Then the cold spots started, areas of the house where the temperature dropped 20 degrees in the span of a step. I'd walk through a doorway and suddenly my breath would mist, frost forming on windows. At midnight the footsteps began, not just on the second floor, on all floors all at once. Dozens of footsteps, walking through corridors, up and down stairs, packing rooms. I locked myself in the bedroom and listened as invisible visitors moved through the house. At 3:17 a.m. I heard singing. A woman's voice, beautiful and clear, singing a lullaby in the hallway outside my door. I cracked the door open and peered out. A figure stood at the end of the hallway. A woman in a gray dress, her back to me, singing softly. "Hello," I called. The singing stopped. The woman's head turned too far, nearly backwards, and I saw her face. She had no eyes, just empty sockets. I slammed the door. The singing resumed, closer now, right outside my door. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." The doorknob turned slowly, though I'd locked it. "Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." The door opened. The woman stood in the doorway, eyeless and smiling. "And if that mockingbird don't sing?" She moved toward me with that same floating motion as Mercy, her feet never touching the floor. I screamed and threw my flashlight at her. It passed through her body like she wasn't there and crashed into the wall. The woman stopped, tilted her head, then dissipated like smoke. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, exhausted and terrified, I called Elias. "The house is full of ghosts," I said when he answered. "Not just Mercy, dozens of them, maybe more." "Yes," Elias said calmly. "The 7 sacrifices, the previous Blackwood women, various people who died on the property over the centuries. The house collects spirits, it's part of the curse." "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? You needed to experience it." I wanted to reach through the phone and strangle him. "I can't stay here. I can't live in a house full of ghosts." "They can't harm you. You're a Blackwood. The house recognizes you. The spirits may frighten you, but they're bound by the same magic that binds Mercy. They can't cross certain thresholds, can't act directly against the bloodline." "That woman came into my bedroom." "Did she touch you?" "No, but—" "Then she can't. The bedroom that was your grandmother's is protected. As long as you're in that room, nothing can harm you. That's why it was prepared for you." I sat down heavily on the bed. "Elias, I can't do this. I can't spend my life here with these things." "Then leave, refuse the inheritance. Let the entity be released. That's your only other choice. There has to be another way. Someone who can break the curse, perform an exorcism, something." Elias was quiet for a moment. "There might be one possibility, but it's dangerous. More dangerous than living in a haunted house for the rest of my life." "Yes, much more dangerous." Elias arrived an hour later with an old man, ancient, really, probably in his 90s, who introduced himself as Father Thomas Holbrook. "I've been the priest of Raven's Hollow for 43 years, Father Holbrook said, his voice reedy but strong. "I knew your grandmother well. She was a remarkable woman. I'm sorry for your situation, Catherine." We sat in the drawing room, me, Elias, and Father Holbrook. The priest set an old leather Bible on the table. "I've studied the Blackwood curse for decades," Father Holbrook said. "Tried to help Agnes find a solution. The problem is that the binding Mercy created is airtight. The entity is trapped. But the trap requires a Blackwood woman to maintain it. Without that anchor, the trap dissolves. So there's no way to break it." I didn't say that. Father Holbrook opened his Bible, revealing that it wasn't a Bible at all. The pages had been hollowed out, hiding a much older book. "There's one theoretical possibility. Mercy used her life force to bind the entity. If another sacrifice were offered, A willing, powerful sacrifice. It might strengthen the binding enough to become permanent. The entity would remain trapped even without a Blackwood anchor. Hope flared in my chest. What kind of sacrifice? Father Holbrook's expression was grave. A life, a willing death performed in the binding circle with the right rituals. The death would feed the binding, make it self-sustaining. The hope died. You're saying someone has to die to free me. Someone would have to choose to die, to take Mercy's place in the binding. That's murder. I can't ask someone to die for me. No one is asking you to. Father Holbrook closed the book. I'm telling you the only theoretical solution. Whether anyone would choose to make that sacrifice is another matter. I looked at Elias. He avoided my gaze. Would it work? I asked. Definitely. Probably, Father Holbrook said. The ritual is complex. There's a chance it might fail and then the death would be meaningless. But if it works, the binding would be permanent. The entity would remain trapped forever, you'd be free to leave, and the Blackwood curse would end. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the overgrown gardens. I'll find another way. There is no other way, Father Holbrook said gently. I've spent 43 years looking. This is the only possibility. After they left, I went to the library and began reading everything I could find about the curse, the binding, and the entity trapped below. There had to be something, some loophole, some solution that didn't require death or imprisonment. I read for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, eating only when absolutely necessary. The ghosts continued their nightly activities, whispers, footsteps, cold spots, occasional manifestations, but I ignored them. I found nothing. On the third night, frustrated and exhausted, I went to the cellar to confront Mercy again. She was waiting, of course, always waiting. You've been reading, Mercy said. Looking for an escape, did you find one? No. Of course not, I spent decades looking myself. There is no escape, only choices, bad ones. She moved toward the edge of her circle. You can stay and maintain the binding, living half a life in this prison. You can leave and unleash the entity, dooming thousands. Or what? Mercy's eyeless gaze bored into me. Or you can take my place. I stared at her. What? The binding requires a Blackwood woman, but it doesn't specify which one. If you chose freely. Thanks for watching.